Does anybody have any questions for any of the panelists up here? Way in the back.
Graduate schools that we bring back here are just as dangerous to the concept of moving forward as a mixed, culturally distinct, non-Western people and government. And so part of that responsibility perhaps falls upon ourselves as educated Navajos to stop and listen to elders like my father, perhaps Judge Rousey back there, and other folks in our communities that have knowledge that is just as valuable as academic non-Navajo scholars that are oftentimes quoted in these academic papers on Navajo culture. So I just wanted to ask you that question in the context of overall conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Well, I think one of the things that we as Diné peoples need to understand and find meaning for is the notion of decolonization. What does that mean? I think there's a lot of discussion, not only here, but in other indigenous communities about that. And so what you have is that this decolonization is seen in terms of a social process. It starts with yourself, the individual. And I think if you look at a lot of different discussions and writings, that's the primary location is yourself. How do you decolonize yourself to think on that level? And how does that then come about in terms of the practical aspects of it within your family, and then later on in your community? I think this is a process that is not done in a year or even 10 years. This is a generational process. And so now there's some examples I think that you can look at in our communities and other Native communities that show movement toward decolonization. One of them is the language revitalization movement taking place. Communities wanting to make sure that the language is taught to the children, and that it continues on, and that a philosophical thought process develops with that particular aspect. You also see other examples taking place with health and wellness aspects, trying to reconstitute indigenous diets, certain types of foods to battle diabetes. And then you also have decolonization efforts taking place in a forum like this, where we have these types of discussions and thoughts that reverberate through who we interact with, who we talk to, our families, our spouses, our husbands, our girlfriends and boyfriends, our grandmothers and grandfathers. Those types of discussions are acts of decolonization in terms of a practical level. These are the beginning points, I think. And then the idea, I think, is that over space and time, you create what sociologists call critical mass of individuals who discuss and think on this level, and who want to help to better and transform our communities, whether it's about transforming health disparities or whether it's about battling and overturning poverty and a lot of socioeconomic issues. So those are just some of my thoughts on that. So thank you for your question again.
This is for Mr. Lee. My name is Alfred Bennett from the big city, Shiprock. A long time ago, back in the 70s, early 70s, we used to talk about Navajo independence. How soon do you foresee this happening to one day that instead of becoming a state within in America, that we become a separate nation? That would be my question to you.
That's a great question. I think one way to kind of think about it is, okay, what do we mean by independence? What does that mean for us as Dene peoples? And I think that's where a discussion needs to take place. If we think of it in terms of a political nation-state lens, that means something along the lines of what the United States is and Canada and other nation-states around the world. If that's what Dene peoples want, then that I think will take a few generations. My hope is that something along those lines that reflect our identity and way of life in terms of our distinctiveness, our cultural integrity. I think what we have, though, right now, and there are a lot of scholars that have talked about this, including Dr. Dinetdale, that talk about cultural sovereignty a lot. How cultural sovereignty is about maintaining our way of life in so many different ways and spaces. So examples of that are speaking our language every day, not reverting back to English. Creating artwork and creativity that reflect our identity as Dene peoples. eating certain foods that reflect our ancestors and our history. Those are some examples of this. I mean, there's many, many more of this notion of cultural sovereignty, which I think if you were to have a discussion about that, is you could say that is acts of independence. That's acts of who we are as Dene peoples. And we're doing that right now. The political nation-state one is something that I think a discussion has to take place. Because I would say that there are many Dene peoples who would move in that direction, and of course there would be others that would oppose that, saying that that's past. We're not gonna get that. But the discussion should take place, and really kind of say, well, what does it really mean for us as Dene peoples in terms of self-determination, in terms of independence, in terms of these important Western concepts that we've adopted and acculturated, and how does those terminologies then reflect our philosophy and our language, and how we interact with each other and how we interact with others. So that's a great question. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Can we give our panel and discussant another round of applause? And